Hello, welcome to Willie Island. I'm Aidan McCarthy and I'm here on behalf of Bantry Historical Society, and we're doing a few interviews here today. We're out in the old schoolhouse in Willie Island that has been recently renovated by local man Tim O'Leary, and I'm here first to introduce you to Seán Kelly, who is discussing the life and work of local Bantry-born poet Derry O'Sullivan. So I'd like to introduce you to Seán, and he will recite a few poems and give some history of Derry O'Sullivan.
Thanks for the introduction, Aidan, and as you said, I'm here to say a few words about Derry O'Sullivan for those who mightn't have heard of him, because he's a man that has been absent for a good few years from Bantry. Derry grew up here in Bantry. He was born and reared in Lingarth Road. Did his primary schooling in Bantry. My earliest memories of Derry would be as an altar boy. I wasn't an altar, by the way. I was one of the country boys, and the country boys didn't do altar boy, but Derry was. And strangely enough, most of my memories of him seem to be connected with religion in one way or another. So he was an altar boy then, and then he suddenly disappeared, and I sort of wondered where he'd got to. And it was late, of course, I found out that he'd gone to Rochestown. He studied in Rochestown and did his leaving cert from there, and then he decided to join the Capuchins. And the next place I came across him was in UCC when I was a student there myself, and he was a couple of years ahead of me studying, I think it was philosophy and Latin, as would be fit budding priest. And then he was ordained and kind of disappeared for a good while again, because having been ordained, he was posted to France. And he remained in France, has spent most of his life in France since then. He left the priesthood in the meantime. He actually got married and had a family. And he lives and has lived for since the late 60s, early 70s, he has lived in Paris. He taught English in the Sorbonne, and he also took up the hobby of writing Irish poetry in his spare time, and eventually these poems transpired into a collection, and he won the Oireachtas Prize for one of his collections in 1987, and there was a kind of a successful homecoming to Bantry at that stage. I have taken a huge interest in him as a poet, and his writings. He's what you'd call a very reflective kind of poet, a kind of a philosopher poet, I suppose you'd describe him as. And so what I'm proposing to do here this afternoon is I brought along 3 poems written by Derry. I'm going to read them in Irish, as they were all written in Irish to start with, and then we'll do English translations. They all have connections in one way or another with Bantry. The first, you might struggle to find the connection, because it's about an imagined journey that he is doing in outer space. But the Bantry connection is that if you go to the local gaeilgeóir, you'll see the poem on the wall in the local gaeilgeóir, and there's a lot of projects that have been done around it by the students. This particular poem is called Blip, which Derry describes as an onomatopoeic word. The sound conveys the sense, and it goes as follows. Uig shadam dovhu, na tira na hageen, food for the hele, Lorgafri garden clock rosetta focal wing hooha, pyramidi il storig, oragrishi, cawilid. Burley iad erasel biogdov, egenir fagboherin conra mathematicula. Wouldn't a clock the adring cortine meteor, on shin bien agloring gush crispy or satellite. Fuin geffi see cosmish ser hit him treat spas. Anorig cursa temple Venus, Lorgaim hu, le fadin ashka, go wachahu of Prabba Trasna Scoileán, Blip. And the translation of this has been provided by himself. So the English translation goes, "From up here, you're a black world. Countries, oceans, all higgledy-piggledy. Hieroglyphics for which we lack a pocket Rosetta Stone. Pyramids, skyscrapers, cathedrals, where are they? They are a bundle on a tiny black donkey, grazing a boreen on a mathematical pad. At times a curtain of meteors is hung between us. Then we are terrified our satellite will be smashed under a shower of cosmic boulders, free-falling through space. Last year, as we circled Venus, we sought you in vain, until I spotted you crossing our screen, Blip." And that, as I said, is can be seen on the walls of the gaeilgeóir at the entrance. And there is also a collection of project work that was done around this with the artist and various teachers. Now, the next poem is very much connected to Bantry. It's a description of the Eucharistic procession in Bantry when Derry was growing up. The memories that he describes here would very much resonate with my own memories of attending the Eucharistic procession in Bantry as a youngster. So again, we'll go for the Irish version first of all. It's called Titimamach. Der komme egen in jov, fele Christri, bratter, trasaltrat I ronta credever en mile. Unde when jov vustere, myrres is op a brog, eg poga kosik heeste Christ. I vanu brat gat an English catechog eg titimistach, brushe shiem, hala an orsa kosanta tjul. Kirstor vane hara eg lea. Tush eg rena gal, rivan hakrament. Die, non saga proste, no lerani fra hala eg kaftabak. Gremere, engel egen dienach, eg banu hi go kuyak, go kosulut avlinge. Trumpele biola, saidura haladig, fui ede droch hoshul. Lieutenant Shasta eg austrukt. Tim amak! On plas moor gui, fui hitam amak tusha, is volle taracho. Imecha, garsoon in ede, eg hiet comuine, eg ahrish gathish an orsa. Eg tidim amak, eg tidim istak, of roganua eg shille le trek le tara. Eg jaun blin on megan lasha in a hiense, no in a astitim varatoch again. So tidim of course, literally means falling out. That might suggest that there was a falling out with somebody, but he's using it here in the sense of the command which was given, an army command, fall out when the Guard of Honour, which was usually provided at that time by the FCA, could relax. And they weren't officially on parade anymore. So this is the reference to the falling out. In some way today, the feast of Christ the King, an ironic transcendence of faith can be felt in the town. The Lamb of God in a butcher's window. Mary in the shoe shop, kissing the feet of the crucified Christ. Every house has an image or a flag. The Catholic Church falling in procession on the heels of the local defence force. White handkerchiefs on melting tar. Incense rising as smoke before the Blessed Sacrament. God, or the parish priest, or the altar server smoking. On a ladder is some late angel finishing the whitening of his house, to the resemblance of a host. A trumpet to the lips of a temporary soldier in ill-fitting uniform, a lieutenant standing, backing, "Fall out!" The large praying square, under fallout of incense and the smell of hot tar. Near me, a little boy in his first communion clothes, imitating the movements of the force, falling out, falling in, his new shoes dripping with a trickle of tar. 20 years hence, will this day be a melody or a deadly falling out for him? And just one reference that might be a little bit obscure. This is my own translation of the poem, by the way, so any mistakes in it I have to take responsibility for here. The angel standing on a ladder, whitening his house, was a famous character whom I will not name, who lived in the town, and he was, to put it very mildly, quite perverse in his ways. So most people would have their houses painted or whitewashed, as the case may be, before the procession came, but he always made a point of being out on his ladder, whitewashing the front of the house as the procession was going by. So this was the angel that was whitening the house, up on his ladder. Other than that, I think the rest, certainly for somebody who grew up around the same time and remembered the procession as it used to be in its glory days, when the square was full of praying people, it's a very authentic picture of what it was like. And of course the windows decorated, and there was a certain irony there with the Lamb of God being visible in the butcher's window, ironically enough, and in the window of the shoe shop there was Mary kissing the feet of the crucified Christ. So that's falling out, taking a mock. The next poem and final poem that I'm going to read from his collection is, to me, the most powerful poem that he has written. It's called Moravgin, Lady of the Huddle Tree, gaeilgeóir Limbo, and it's dedicated to Nuala McCarthy. Nuala McCarthy, for those of you who remember, lived in High Street. Moravgin is a stillbirth, and the story behind this is that apparently one of Nuala McCarthy's children was stillborn and was buried in, Derry calls it the Coineenach, I would call it the Kileenach, up near BH&AS, between the hospital and BH&AS. It is actually kind of trying to portray a picture of the time when the church had a very almost savage outlook on the fate of the unborn child. So theologically speaking, if the child was unbaptized, he couldn't go to heaven. And of course, he would have died with the stain of original sin, as it was put at the time. So because that wasn't his fault, because it wasn't the sin that he committed, you couldn't send him to hell either. So the theologians invented an in-between place called Limbo. And that was a kind of a holding pen, really, for all those who died unborn. They were neither in heaven nor hell, and they were consigned to there for all eternity. During the Second Vatican Council, they thankfully did away with the concept of limbo. Now, Nuala McCarthy, it was apparently who told Derry the story of this unbaptized child, which was stillborn, and subsequently he found out that 40 years after the event, he had a brother himself who was stillborn and who was buried in the Kileenach. And this triggered a kind of an outburst, really, I think you'd call it, of rage against the teaching, the harsh teaching of that time and the way in which these babies were treated. And this is what you have here in Moravgin. Syria had Vasco is cóiríocht de gaeilgeóir cróchar beag de bhathair. Srangan im le chan slán adrif, áil lína go háin as ord. Dúirt an sagart go raibh roianach don isce baiste nó méfa a dairige loch bó finne. Is a glannach fi réin bhean trí. Gearach hu is fille hu gan éan gan ní e bob héir réaltan iscart. Chin línte faoin gogadán de le de bhéal. Dina córan dit de bhoscó ráistí. Is mar requim, déis de bhathair le casúrach de mista fogsáiste. Is an bharan fra árálé, go raibh gan stróga Limbo. Amach as ospedéal na tróchare, dúmpar an gaeilgeóir faoin ascail hu. Dafan gaeir de hocrad, go gortne an tógach, a dúchtar fós an canínach. Is ána chuideach hu, gan fadar, gan cloch, gan cris. Baul dain, deonta míle mar gwen gan enam. Gan de cuairteoirí chud ach na madrí ochracha. Inniuh dahad bliain níos faoin an áil, léas réaltan deisceart, ná greidan díogarí hile, go raibh do Limbo. A gealam se gait a grahéirín, nach bhacha éinge dad a húl, nach greidan chuithe ionta a ríis. Tá Limbo ann cho chintis atá lach bó finne, agus is ann á hin a bharin na bháthir, is smuointe áilní an tóga á dó. Gach nútán ina leabhar ní, I géisteach le ní neamhnite, I dafan tronhóna na madarí. There was a lady who did a very professional translation of this, which I prefer to my own, and she actually won an international award for her translation and for the quality of the poem. And I have decided to go with her translation rather than use my own translation here. So it goes Stillborn, 1943, calling Limbo. You were born dead, and your blue limbs were folded on the living bier of your mother, the umbilical cord unbroken between you, like an out-of-service phone line. The precept was too late for the blessed baptismal water that arose from Loch Bofina and cleansed the elect of Bantry. So you were cut from her and wrapped and washed in a copy of the Southern Star. A headline about the war across your mouth. An orange box would serve as coffin, and as requiem, your mother listened to hammering out in the hallway, and the nurse saying to her that you'd make Limbo without any trouble. Out of the Hospital of Mercy, the gardener carried you under his arm, with backing of dogs for a funeral oration, to a nettle-covered field that they still call the little churchyard. You were buried there without cross or prayer. Your grave, a shallow hole, one of 1,000 without names, with only the hungry dogs for visitors. Today, 40 years on, I read in the Southern Star, theologians have stopped believing in Limbo. But I'm telling you, little brother, whose eyes never opened, that I've stopped believing in them. For Limbo is as real as Loch Bofina. Limbo is the place your mother never left, where her thoughts lash her like nettles, and the Southern Star in her lap is an unread breviary, where she strains to hear the names of nameless children in the backing of dogs each and every afternoon.